Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. So, a couple of fairly interesting events have occurred over the last 24 to 48 hours. We continue to see Russian forces advance west of Avdiivka. At the same time, we are seeing the Ukrainians launch retaliatory strikes, trying to regain a somewhat successful victory narrative by attacking targets throughout the Russian Federation. Over the last 24 to 48 hours, we have seen the largest amount of airstrikes, drone strikes, being conducted against Russian territory that has not been seen since World War II. The Ukrainians are using these kamikaze drones to attack a variety of cities and infrastructure targets throughout the Western Russian Federation. Specifically, what is also a bit concerning is the Ukrainians attempted an attack on this nuclear facility near Rostov. This was one of the targets that Ukrainian kamikaze drones attempted to attack. Now, it appears that Russian air defense systems, the Russian Air Defense Network, has gotten very good at shooting these kamikaze drones down, just like the Ukrainians have become fairly proficient at shooting these fairly slow-moving drones out of the sky. So, not a lot of damage was done by these Ukrainian drones against Russian targets, but nonetheless, the Ukrainians are attempting to go after these Russian cities, these Russian infrastructure targets, and we will probably continue to see this occur. Now, what is disturbing, a lot of this technology is Western technology. Many of these drones would not have the ability to get to some of these target areas without U.S. GPS. But nonetheless, they're being used and will continue to be used in this conflict. Now, additionally, we have seen what the Ukrainians are calling the Russian Legion crossing into Russia proper to the south and west of Belgorod. That's this area here. Let's go back over to the deep state map and you can kind of get a better idea of just where some of these encroachments are taking place. So in this area here, again, we're kind of in a south by southeast direction from Belgorod, and there has been past operations further to the west as well. But the main operation from the so-called Russian Legion unit. Now look, when the Ukrainians call this the Russian Legion, they are pretending that this is some sort of group that originated inside the Russian Federation that was then trained and equipped in Ukraine and then launched attacks into Russia. Look, most Ukrainians speak Russian as their primary language. That is a fact. Most Ukrainians do not speak Ukrainian. And therein lies the history of the situation, which you, the viewer, really you need to dig into and you need to understand what is happening on the ground. In the history, especially, of the struggles in eastern Ukraine. Novorossiya with those living in western Ukraine. Now, are these Russians who once lived in Russia proper attacking Russia? And the short answer to that is no. The reality is these are Ukrainian, quote unquote, Ukrainian military units, trained in Ukrainian military bases or trained in the United Kingdom, Poland, Romania, some North Atlantic Treaty Organization base, and then deployed against Russian forces. There is not much difference between Russian Legion forces, quote unquote Russian Legion forces, and regular Ukrainian line forces. As a matter of fact, I would just call this a Ukrainian reconnaissance force on Russian territory southeast of Belgorod. Let's just speak the truth, and that's what it is. Now, I anticipate that the Russians will rapidly counterattack in this sector and drive those Ukrainian, quote, Russian Legion forces out of this area. Now, additionally, we have seen another fairly interesting operation take place in Kherson. And this locale here, we have received reports that Russian Spetsnaz special operation forces were able to cross the Dnieper River. This was either a heli-borne operation or a operation in which they crossed via boats, much like the Ukrainians have done in the past as well with these raiding missions. Now, what's interesting is at least this map claims that this is a disputed area, so it would be very difficult for Russian boats to get launched from these areas. So again, you have to look at the possibility of a low-flying heli-borne assault with Russian Special Operations Forces, or again, some sort of amphibious operation that occurred in this area. And the Russians went after a Ukrainian unit. Allegedly, the Russians were able to capture up to a few dozen Ukrainian prisoners of war. There was something in this area that the Russians were going after in this strike. Was it a Western piece of equipment that the Russians had gained valuable intelligence about and decided that they wanted to try and capture? But again, the Russians conducted some form of special operation forces on the western bank of the Dnieper River, the right bank of the Dnieper River, in what is Ukrainian territory. Now, hopefully we'll get more information about this special operation by Russian forces in this area, and we'll learn more exactly what the Russians were going after. But again, as we see these drone strikes that the Ukrainians are launching, again, this is to take away the narrative of what is happening all along the front line. And that is the slow and perpetual collapse of the Ukrainian front. We have seen the $300 million emergency aid package being sent to the Ukrainians. We have seen reports of additional high-end U.S. weapon systems being rapidly sent over to the Ukrainians. Again, it's not the $60 billion that the Ukrainians want. It's $300 billion. The White House is doing what it can to try and patch up the situation before this very leaky front becomes a all-out flood. And that is the concern right now for the Ukrainians, especially in various locales west of Avdiivka and other locales as well. This area here, where my cursor is hovering, this was a new Ukrainian strongpoint. And you can see here, if we go to the mapping system, and again, this is a pro-Ukrainian mapping system I'm using, And if we look at what has occurred over the course of the last few days, you can see that the Russians are now enveloping this strong point. Again, you have this area here, terrain feature, river, creek, what have you, tree lines, then urban areas here. And you can see over the course of just a few days what has happened here. So this is an envelopment operation by the Russians designed to defeat this Ukrainian strongpoint. And that's happening as we speak. And we're really seeing these localized operations, these methodical moves west happening all across the front line. We continue to see Russian missile strikes, Iskander ballistic missile strike, cruise missile strikes against both Ukrainian infrastructure targets. Also, more and more successful hits on what are reported as Ukrainian Patriot missile batteries and other air defense nodes throughout Ukraine. It looks like the Russians were paying very close attention to some of those forward deployed Patriot missile batteries that were causing some issue for Russian Su-34s and other aircraft that were flying ground strike missions closer to the line of contact. Remember, before, the Ukrainians were using Patriots and some more advanced air defense weapon systems around key targets such as Kiev, Lviv, and some other areas. But recently, within the last few weeks, they've brought some of those Patriot missile batteries closer to the front to be able to engage Russian aircraft that are continuing to assault Ukrainian frontal defensive lines closer to the line of contact. But again, we're going to keep watching very, very closely what is happening southeast of Belgorod. We're going to continue to monitor this war of the cities. Remember the Iran-Iraq war, where both sides started using ballistic missiles against cities and infrastructure targets. Now, what is going to be the Russian response? What will be the Russian response to continued kamikaze drone attacks on Russian targets in very sensitive areas? Areas such as St. Petersburg, very sensitive target. Areas such as Kursk, Voronezh, other areas that are very sensitive to the Russians. Now, again, these strikes, these drone strikes, may not cause a lot of damage per se, and many of them are being shot down. But it does have a psychological effect, both on the Russian leadership and the Russian citizen. It does. And I would say it's not a psychological effect that is good for the Ukrainians. It's going to lead, in all probability, to a greater escalation of the conflict. Again, as I've talked about before, we are either going to see a road to peace, a peace that is fractured and unsteady, but peace, somewhat peace, or we are going to see the road to escalation, where the war becomes bigger, larger, and possibly brings in other nation states directly into the conflict. And there's a great risk of that happening in this conflict. So that's where we stand for today. We will continue to monitor, report, and bring you more factual information about what's happening on the ground, and more to come very, very soon. As always, thanks for joining us. More to come. Have a good day.